The sun was already dying when the engine quit. One moment, Dax Rourke was doing 73 down an empty county road, nothing but cracked asphalt and dying cornfields stretching to the horizon. And the next, his Harley coughed once, shuddered like something being put down, and rolled to silence on the shoulder. He sat there in the fading orange light, listening to the tick of cooling metal, the wind moving through dead grass. Nothing else. No cars. No houses. Just an abandoned farmhouse set back from the road behind a rusted gate, paint peeling like skin off a burn victim. He was still crouched over the engine when he heard it, a sound that had no business existing in 40 miles of empty countryside. A little girl's voice, somewhere below the ground, screaming for someone who wasn't coming. What Dax found in that cellar would break something open in him that had been sealed shut for 11 years. Two little girls, one barely old enough to walk, chained in the dark and forgotten by every system built to protect them. And the man who everyone in 3 counties crossed the street to avoid became, in that moment, the only one willing to go down into that darkness and bring them home. This is their story. Stay with me until the end. It's going to shake something in you. If this kind of story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. I want to know where in this world people still believe in doing what's right. The road didn't have a name. It showed up on county maps as CR-17, a designation that meant nothing to anyone except the handful of ranchers who used it twice a year and the occasional lost tourist who overshot the highway exit by 15 miles and couldn't figure out why their phone signal had died. Dax Rourke had ridden it maybe 40 times over the last decade, always at dusk or after dark, always going faster than he should, always grateful for the way it asked nothing of him. No traffic, no towns, no people who recognized the cut on his back and stiffened up. He'd been riding since 3 in the afternoon, leaving the quarterly gathering of the Iron Hollow MC 4 hours before the others called it done, same as always. He wasn't unfriendly. He just didn't know how to be around people once the beer ran out and the conversations turned to ordinary life, kids and house payments and vacation plans. Things that existed in a world that had moved on without him sometime around his 31st year, when he'd come back from his second tour with both hands intact and everything else quietly destroyed. The engine quit without warning. No sputtering, no gradual loss of power. One moment the road was moving under him, and the next it simply wasn't. The Harley coasted in silence for another 30 yards before Dax brought it to a stop on the gravel shoulder, feet down, listening to the tick of cooling metal and trying to remember when he'd last checked the fuel line on the primary. 3 weeks ago, maybe. Could have been 4. He didn't keep a log because keeping a log implied a future worth organizing. He climbed off and crouched beside the engine in the last 20 minutes of amber light, peeling off his gloves to work, fingers finding the familiar geography of metal and wire by feel as much as sight. The temperature had dropped 6 degrees since he'd left the gathering, that particular October cold that didn't announce itself but simply arrived, settling into the space between your collar and your neck and staying there. His breath made small clouds. The dead grass in the field to his left bent and straightened in a wind that carried the smell of turned earth and something else, something older and wetter, like a basement that hadn't been opened in years. He was 3 minutes into the diagnosis when he saw the farmhouse. It sat maybe 80 yards off the road behind a gate made of 2-inch steel pipe, the kind of gate that ranchers welded themselves back when they had more iron than money. The gate was chained shut with a padlock so corroded it had turned the color of old blood. Beyond it, a gravel drive led to a structure that had been a working farmhouse maybe 15 years ago and was now something the countryside was slowly reclaiming. Porch roof sagging on one side, windows dark, a weather vane on the roof barn frozen in place pointing northeast, a direction it had probably indicated for the last decade without variation because the mechanism had rusted through. There were no vehicles. No tire tracks in what was left of the gravel. No light of any kind. Dax looked at it for approximately 4 seconds, cataloged it as abandoned, and looked back at the engine. He heard it 40 seconds later. The sound was faint enough that he might have dismissed it as wind, except it had the wrong shape for wind. Wind moved in curves and pressure changes in the kind of sound that filled space. This sound was coming from somewhere specific. It was directional. It was small. And it had, buried inside it, The particular texture of human desperation that Dax Rourke had heard in 2 different countries and one courthouse waiting room and hoped he would never hear again. He straightened slowly. The sound came again, and this time he could separate it into components. A child's voice, high-pitched, hoarse, like it had been going for a long time. Words he couldn't quite make out at this distance, but the shape of the words didn't matter. The shape of the sound was enough. It was the sound of someone who had stopped believing anyone was listening, but was calling out anyway because stopping felt like giving up. He looked at the gate, looked at the padlock, looked back at his motorcycle sitting dead on the shoulder in the fading light. He crossed the field. The grass was knee-high in places, still holding some of the afternoon's dampness against his jeans as he pushed through it. The gate chain gave him about 3 seconds of consideration before he found a chunk of field stone the size of a grapefruit near the fence post and used it to put enough pressure on the lock's shackle that the corroded mechanism gave way with a sound like a dry bone breaking. He pushed the gate open, didn't bother closing it behind him, and moved up the drive toward the house. Up close, it was worse. The porch boards were soft in several places. He tested each step before putting his weight down, hand against the door frame that was warped so badly the front door hung 6 inches open on its own, held in place by the angle of the frame. Through the gap he could see a front room stripped of everything except a kitchen chair lying on its side and a curtain that had fallen from its rod and pooled on the floor. He pushed the door fully open and went in. The sound was louder inside, coming from below. His eyes adjusted quickly. Years of practice, or something that had rewired itself during the months he'd spent in places where light was a liability. The front room opened to a kitchen on the right with bare counters and a stove someone had disconnected and pushed sideways from the wall. To the left, a hallway. Straight ahead, a door that was different from the others, heavier, newer hardware, a sliding bolt on the outside. The kind of door you didn't put on the inside of a house unless you wanted to keep something in. The bolt was thrown. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and pulled the bolt back. The door swung outward, and the smell that came up from below hit him before anything else. Cold concrete, human waste, the particular staleness of air that hadn't circulated in days. Wooden steps descended into darkness. Somewhere at the bottom of them, the sound resolved itself into words for the first time. "Hello? Is somebody there? Please, please, we're down here, please!" Dax stood at the top of the stairs for 1 full second. Then he went down. The cellar was concrete block, maybe 18 by 20 feet, with a single bare bulb socket in the ceiling that held nothing. The only light came from the doorway behind and above him, and it reached maybe 6 feet before the dark swallowed it. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, activated the flashlight, and swept it left. The beam found a support beam in the far corner, found a length of chain running from a bolt in the concrete floor up to a ring welded to the beam at about waist height for an adult. Found the child at the end of the chain. She was 6 years old, maybe 7, small for her age in a way that suggested she hadn't been eating enough for longer than the last few days. Dark hair matted and tangled, a dress that had been clean once, white with small blue flowers, the kind that a grandmother might have chosen, now gray with concrete dust and what looked like dried mud. Her wrists were encircled by a single loop of chain connected to a smaller padlock, and she was sitting with her back against the support beam with something bundled in her lap, her arms wrapped around it. She squinted against the flashlight beam, raising one chained hand to shield her eyes. And what hit Dax first wasn't the chain or the dress, or even her face. It was the way she angled her body, protecting what was in her lap. Not herself, whatever she was holding. "Don't come closer," she said. Her voice had been worn raw, but there was something in it that was still upright. "I'll yell." "Okay," Dax said. He stopped moving, kept the light angled slightly away from her face. "My name is Dax. I heard you from outside. I'm not going to hurt you." "That's what people say." "I know." She studied him for a moment. He let her. He'd learned a long time ago that you couldn't rush this kind of calculation. She was weighing every variable available to her. His size, his voice, the distance between them, the fact that he'd come down the stairs rather than unlocking the door from outside. She was doing survival math, and she was doing it with a sophistication that no child her age should have had. "There's water in her bottle," Mila said. "I've been saving it, but it's almost gone. She needs more." The bundle in her lap made a small sound. Not words, not quite a cry. Something between the two. Dax had been in firefights. He had sat in a VA waiting room for 6 hours next to a man who hadn't spoken since Fallujah and understood more than most people ever would about what that silence meant. He had watched things happen that reconfigured whatever factory settings the human nervous system came with. None of it had prepared him for the sound a 10-month-old made in a concrete cellar after days without enough food, or for the way her 6-year-old sister had arranged herself between that infant and the door. He crouched down to her level. "What's her name?" "Avery." The child met his eyes for the first time. "I'm Mila." "How long have you been here, Mila?" She thought about it. The light was on, then it went off. "It's been off since the second night." He nodded, kept his voice level. "Is anyone else in the house?" "No, he left." "Your father?" Something shifted in her face. "He said he'd be back. He said if we weren't here when he came back, he'd know. He'd always know." She paused. "But I stopped believing that part." Dax looked at the chain, at the padlock, at the bolt in the floor which had been set in concrete and was going nowhere without a serious tool. He looked at the padlock on the chain at her wrist, smaller, a different model than the one on the gate. This one hadn't been left to weather, which meant it would require a key or a proper pick. He didn't have either. What he did have was a folding knife with a 3-inch blade, a multi-tool in his jacket's interior pocket, a Zippo lighter, and whatever fieldstone happened to be in the vicinity. He also had, somewhere in the saddlebag on his dead Harley 80 yards away, a small bolt cutter he'd been carrying for 6 months after having to cut a padlocked equipment gate during a club run that had required a detour through private property. He'd meant to take it out of the bag 3 times and never gotten around to it. "I have to go get something from my motorcycle," he said. "It's just outside. I'll be back in 4 minutes." Mila's face did not change expression, but her arms tightened slightly around Avery, and the motion said everything about what she expected from people who said they'd come back. "I'll leave the door open," Dax said, "and I'm going to leave the flashlight, so you can see." He set the phone on the bottom step with the flashlight pointing into the cellar, stood, and took the stairs 2 at a time. He was back in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, breathing harder than the distance warranted because he'd run. Something he hadn't done in years, and the ground was uneven, and some part of him was absolutely certain that if he wasn't back when he said he would be, something would break in that child that had been holding together through sheer determination for however many days she'd been in the dark. The bolt cutter took 11 seconds on the chain at the floor bolt. The padlock on Mila's wrist was a different challenge. The cutter's jaw was too wide for the shackle. He worked at it with the multi-tool's wire cutters for 40 seconds before the shackle gave enough that he could pull it open. Mila didn't make a sound through any of it. She sat perfectly still, still holding Avery, watching his hands with those dark eyes that had clearly done a great deal of watching in a short life. When the chain fell away, she looked at her wrist for a moment, at the red marks the metal had left, and then she looked at Dax. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes." "Is Avery hurt?" "She's hungry. She cried a lot, but I kept her warm." A pause. She stopped crying. "I don't know if that's good." It wasn't good, and Dax knew it, but what he said was, "Let me carry her. Can you do that?" Mila considered this for what felt like a long time, then she held out the infant. Avery was lighter than Dax expected, and heavier than he remembered anything being. She was 10 months old, and she had been in a concrete basement for at least 3 days, and she looked at him with eyes that didn't quite focus, the particular unfocused look of a baby too depleted to be curious. He shifted her against his chest, one arm under her, and felt her warmth. And felt something else too, something that cracked along a seam he'd thought was fused shut. He picked up the phone with his free hand and held the other one out to Mila. She looked at it for a moment, then she took it. They came up out of the cellar into the kitchen, through the front room, out onto the porch in the last gray-blue light of evening. Mila stopped on the porch steps and looked at the sky. Just looked at it. Dax stopped beside her and didn't say anything, and after a moment she exhaled, a long, deliberate breath. and came down the steps. His Harley was still dead on the shoulder where he'd left it. He set Mila up on the seat with Avery in her lap and his leather jacket wrapped around both of them against the cold, then worked at the engine for another 12 minutes before he admitted that whatever had failed wasn't something he was fixing in the dark on the side of a county road. He pulled out his phone and called the only number he trusted in this context. Not dispatch, not 911, not anyone who worked for a system that had clearly already failed these two children at least once. He called Garrett Foles. Garrett picked up on the second ring with, "You're late," and Dax said, "I need the truck, CR17, the abandoned Hendricks place, and I need you not to ask questions until you get here." Silence on the line. Then, "How long?" 20 minutes. 15. The call ended. Dax looked at Mila, who was sitting on his Harley with his jacket around her shoulders and Avery held close against her chest, watching him with those careful eyes. "Someone's coming," he said. "Someone I trust." "How do I know if I should trust him?" "You don't yet." "That's fair." He sat down on the ground a few feet away, back against the fence post, stretching his legs out. "While we wait, can you tell me how long you've been here?" Mila thought about it the way she seemed to think about everything, carefully, starting with what she knew for certain. "We drove for a long time. It was light when we left and dark when we got there. He said we were going to stay at Grandpa's house, but Grandpa wasn't there. He said Grandpa was in the hospital." She paused. "He took our shoes." Dax didn't react to that. Taking shoes was a control mechanism, basic, effective on children. He filed it away next to the bolt in the concrete floor and the way she'd positioned herself between Avery and the door, and kept his voice even. "Do you remember anything about where you live, your house, a town?" "Creston Falls," she said immediately. "Our house is on Maple Street, but I don't know the number. Our mom taught me the street in case I ever got lost." Her voice changed slightly on the word mom. "She's probably looking for us." "I think you're right," Dax said. Mila looked at him steadily. "My dad said she left because she didn't want us." The temperature had dropped another 2 degrees. Somewhere out in the dead fields, a crow made one short sound and went quiet. Dax looked at Mila, and she looked back at him. And whatever she was searching for in his face, she was doing it with a precision that felt older than 6 years. "He told you that?" Dax said. "He told us lots of things." She looked down at Avery. Some of them weren't true. Garrett's pickup appeared at the far end of CR17 12 minutes after the call ended, headlights cutting through the blue-black dark, and Dax stood and moved to the road's edge. The truck slowed and stopped, and Garrett Foles climbed out. 61 years old, 6'2", built like someone had assembled a man out of fence posts and weathered timber and then taught him to move quietly. He'd been a cattle rancher for 30 years, and before that something he didn't talk about, and he'd been Dax's closest friend for the better part of a decade in the way that men sometimes developed friendships, almost entirely without conversation, mostly through shared silences and the occasional logistical cooperation. He came around the front of the truck and saw the children. He looked at Dax. Dax looked back at him. Garrett walked to the motorcycle, crouched to Mila's eye level, and said, "My name's Garrett. I've got blankets in the truck, and my wife makes the best soup you'll ever eat." He paused. "How do you feel about soup?" Mila studied him for 3 full seconds. "Okay," she said. "All right then." Garrett took Avery from Mila's arms, carefully, with the practiced ease of a man who'd helped with enough livestock emergencies to know how to handle something fragile. And Dax lifted Mila down from the motorcycle, and they got them both into the cab of the truck with the heater running and 2 blankets from the back seat. Garrett had a water bottle in the center console and a bag of crackers on the passenger seat floor, and Dax watched Mila drink water with careful, measured sips, as if she'd already calculated exactly how much she needed and was being precise about it. Garrett came around to the driver's side, and Dax met him there. "The cellar of the old farmhouse," Dax said quietly. "Chained to a support beam. The baby looks depleted. She needs more than I can give her tonight." Garrett's jaw was working in the way it did when he was processing something that required a different kind of response than the one he'd normally give. "We take them to Lena?" His wife. a former emergency room nurse who'd left the profession 6 years ago for reasons she'd shared with nobody except Garrett and had not discussed since. Yeah, not a hospital, not yet. He paused, aware of how that sounded, and saying it anyway. Mila told me things. There's a father. I don't know the shape of this yet, Garrett, but something is very wrong and I need 24 hours before anyone in an official capacity gets involved. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Lena's not going to like that. I know. She'll do it anyway. I know that too. They loaded Dax's Harley into the truck bed with the help of Garrett's ramp and were on the road inside 8 minutes, Mila sitting between them on the bench seat with Avery in Dax's arms, and the heater turned to high and the dark pressing against the windows. Nobody spoke for the first few miles. Then Mila said, without preamble, "Why did you come in?" Dax looked at her. What? When you heard me, why did you come in? Most people would have thought it was something else, or they would have called somebody and left. Most people would have, Dax agreed. But you didn't. No. Another mile of dark road. The headlights made a tunnel through the black, and they moved through it at 55 miles an hour, the heater ticking, the truck smelling of diesel and old leather, and the particular warmth of livestock spaces. Why? Mila asked again. Dax looked at the road, at the dark on both sides of the headlights. He thought about 11 years ago and a different dark in a different place, and a different sound that he'd heard and not moved toward because he'd been told to hold position, and what had been there when they finally reached it. Because I heard you, he said. Mila seemed to accept this. She leaned against his arm slightly, not quite against him, just adjacent to him, the way a child positions themselves near warmth without fully committing to it, and looked out the windshield at the road unspooling in the headlights, and didn't say anything else. Garrett's ranch was 12 miles east, a working cattle operation with a main house, a bunkhouse that hadn't been used in years, and a barn that Garrett kept in better condition than most people kept their living rooms. The lights were on in the main house when they pulled up, which meant Garrett had called ahead, which meant Lena Foles was already in motion. She met them on the porch. She was 58, compact, with a stillness about her that the emergency room had given her and retirement hadn't taken away. The stillness of someone who'd learned that panicking cost time and time cost lives. She looked at the children in Garrett's arms and Dax's arms, respectively, and her face did a complex thing that lasted about 1 second before it went professional. Inside, she said. The girl first. What's her name? Mila, Dax said. Her sister is Avery, 10 months. How long without food? At least 3 days, possibly 4. Lena looked at Avery for a moment, then back at Dax. Whatever she thought about the situation, about the protocol they were skipping, and the calls they weren't making, it stayed behind her eyes. Come in, she said. The kitchen was warm and large and smelled of coffee and whatever Lena had been cooking before the call came. She settled Mila at the kitchen table and put a glass of milk in front of her, then reached for Avery and cradled her with the automatic competence of someone whose hands still remembered the weight and angle of infants after decades away from the ward. Mila drank the milk in careful sips, watching Lena assess Avery, watching the way Dax and Garrett stood in the kitchen doorway with their arms at their sides and their weight slightly forward, not hovering but present, available. Her color is off, Lena said quietly. Not to anyone in particular. A clinical observation. She needs a hospital, Mila said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes had gone the particular bright of a child holding back something that was threatening to come forward. I know. I've been trying to get her to one. Lena looked at her. I know you have. You've been taking very good care of her. She stopped crying a few hours ago. That's because she's exhausted, not because she's given up. Lena met the child's eyes. She hasn't given up. Neither have you. Something in Mila's face did the thing that faces did when the tension that had been holding everything in place for too long was suddenly no longer required. Her eyes went bright and her jaw worked, and she looked down at the table and pressed her lips together. Nobody moved toward her. Nobody touched her. Garrett turned and got another glass of milk from the refrigerator and set it on the table and moved away, and Dax leaned against the doorframe and looked at the wall above the stove, where Lena kept a collection of cast-iron skillets arranged by size. and the kitchen clock ticked, and outside the wind moved through the dry grass of the south pasture. Mila cried for about 90 seconds. Silently. No sound, just her shoulders and the way her hands gripped the table's edge. Then she stopped and wiped her face with the back of her wrist and looked up. "Is there food?" she asked. Lena was already at the stove. "There is." Dax excused himself from the kitchen and went to the porch, closing the screen door quietly behind him. The cold hit him again, the same cold that had been working at the back of his neck since he'd crouched over the engine on CR-17, and he stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the dark and thought about what Mila had said. He told us lots of things. Some of them weren't true. Dax had been in enough places with enough people to know the geography of a lie designed to stick, the kind that didn't announce itself. The kind that was aimed at a person's weakest point and planted there like a seed, counted on to grow with a child's imagination and turn into something the person themselves started to believe was their own conclusion. You didn't tell a child her mother had abandoned her if you were uncertain about the effect. You told her that because you wanted a specific outcome, and you maintained it over time. And eventually the child stopped questioning it because the questioning was too painful and the conclusion, however devastating, was at least settled. He'd seen it in the way Mila had said it. Matter of fact. The practiced matter-of-factness of something that has been said enough times, it no longer requires emotional preparation to deliver. Her mother didn't leave. Or if she did, she didn't leave willingly. He went back inside for his phone and went back out again and sat on the porch railing and started making calls he didn't know yet how to make. Not to the club, not to anyone with a badge, but to a woman named Rhonda Estep, who had worked as a county court clerk for 22 years and owed him a favor for reasons that did not need to be documented, and who, when he described a child named Mila and a town called Creston Falls, said she'd pull whatever public record she could find by morning. The wind moved. The sky was fully dark, no moon, the stars the kind of hard and uncompromising you only got this far from city light. The porch door opened and Garrett came out with 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to Dax without preamble and leaned against the wall and drank his own. "Lena says the baby's going to be okay," he said. "Dehydrated, malnourished, but okay. Good. She wants to know if she needs to call anyone tonight. Tell her to give me until morning." Garrett nodded. He wasn't happy with it, but the nod was real. "The older one," Garrett said. "Mila." "Yeah. She's been keeping that baby alive for however many days down there, on her own, 6 years old." "I know. That's—" Garrett stopped. "I know," Dax said again. They drank their coffee. The cattle made no sound. The wind did what wind did at midnight on October ranches, which was to remind you that the world was large and cold and mostly indifferent, and that whatever warmth you managed to generate, you generated it yourself or you hadn't. After a while, Garrett went back inside. Dax stayed on the porch. He was still there an hour later when the light in the guest bedroom went off, which meant Mila had finally gone to sleep. He sat with his empty mug and the dark and the weight of what he'd found in that cellar. And he thought about a mother in a town called Creston Falls, who had been told something about her children, and who might have believed it, or might have been fighting against it for however long it had been. The question that bothered him wasn't what had happened. The question that bothered him was what kind of man put his 6-year-old daughter in a concrete cellar and drove away, and what he was willing to do to keep whatever it was he was protecting. Dax reached into his jacket pocket and took out the small padlock he'd pocketed from the cellar floor, the one from the bolt in the concrete, the one sized for an adult wrist, not a child's. He turned it over in his hand in the dark. The metal was cold, heavier than it looked. He was still holding it when the sound came from the guest bedroom. Not a cry, not a voice. Something quieter. The sound of a child rolling over in a real bed for the first time in days, adjusting to the unfamiliar safety of it. Somewhere in Creston Falls, a woman was either still looking for her children or had been broken into believing she had a reason to stop. Either way, by morning, Dax Rourke was going to find her. What he didn't know yet was that someone else was already looking for the children too, and that finding them first was worth far more than he could calculate sitting on a ranch porch in the October dark with an empty coffee mug and a padlock that still held the cold of a concrete basement. Rhonda Estep called back at 6:47 in the morning. Dax had not slept. He'd moved from the porch to the bunkhouse sometime around 2, found a cot that Garrett kept made up for no particular reason, lay down on it fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling until the gray started coming through the single window. He was on his third cup of coffee from the pot he'd made himself in the bunkhouse's small kitchen when the phone buzzed on the wooden table beside him. Creston Falls, Rhonda said. She had the voice of a woman who'd been running on institutional coffee and fluorescent lighting for 2 decades and had made peace with both. Elena Cross filed a missing persons report on 2 minors, Miela Cross, age 6, and Avery Cross, age 10 months, 14 days ago. Prior to that, 3 separate CPS reports in 18 months, 2 custody hearings, 1 restraining order that was filed, contested, and dismissed. A pause. The father is a man named Warren Cross. He had primary custody granted 7 months ago by Judge Harold Fenwick of Harlan County Family Court. Dax set down his coffee mug. "How?" he said. "That's the part I can't tell you from public record. The ruling is sealed. What I can tell you is that Elena Cross has been filing emergency motions to reopen the custody case for the last 4 months. She also filed a report with the Harlan County Sheriff's Office 11 days ago saying she believed her children were in danger. I can see the report was received." Rhonda paused again. "I can't see any follow-up action." Dax was quiet for a moment. Outside, one of Garrett's dogs was moving through the yard, nails clicking on the concrete apron near the barn. "There's one more thing," Rhonda said. "The girl's grandfather, mother's side, was a man named Gerald Cross. Died 8 months ago. Left an estate. The public probate filing lists the estate value at somewhere north of $400,000, but that number's a placeholder. There's a property component that hasn't been assessed yet." Another pause, longer this time. "Both girls are named in the will." Dax picked up the coffee mug again, not to drink from, just to have something to do with his hands. "The father," he said. "Is he named?" "No, the will explicitly excludes Warren Cross from any interest in the estate. The attorney handling probate is a firm in Creston Falls." She gave him the name. He didn't write it down. He had the kind of memory that kept things whether he wanted them or not. "Dax, whatever you found, I didn't ask. But whatever you're doing with it, be careful. Harlan County Family Court and the Sheriff's Office operating without follow-up on a report like this, that's either incompetence or it's something else." "Yeah," he said. "I know which one it usually is." He ended the call and sat with the information for exactly long enough to let it settle into something he could move with, then put on his jacket and went to the main house. Lena was in the kitchen. Avery was in a portable crib that had materialized from somewhere. Dax didn't ask, Lena didn't explain. Positioned near the kitchen radiator, awake and making sounds that were alert and irritated rather than depleted. The improvement between last night and this morning was visible in the color of her face, the focus in her eyes. Lena had clearly been up most of the night. Mila was at the kitchen table eating oatmeal with the careful attention of someone still not entirely convinced the food was going to keep coming. She looked up when Dax came in. He nodded at her. She nodded back, then returned to the oatmeal. "She slept," Lena said quietly, not looking up from where she was heating a bottle at the stove. "Good." 3 hours, then she was up, checked on Avery twice. Went back to sleep. Lena turned to look at him. She's been managing this infant's care schedule in her head. She knew the feeding intervals. She told me what Avery's normal sounds meant. Dax looked at Mila's back. 6 years old, Lena said. "I know." "Dax." He looked at her. "Today," she said. The single word carried everything. Her patience, its limit, the weight of what she'd agreed to the night before, and what she was not going to agree to continue indefinitely. "This afternoon," he said. "I need to make one call first." Lena looked at him the way she always looked at him when he asked for time, like a woman who understood exactly why the request was being made and was extending it not because she believed it was procedure, but because she trusted the person making it. He went back to the bunkhouse and called a number he didn't call often. Rowan Price picked up on the 4th ring with the particular silence of a man who waited to speak until he knew who was calling, even when he could see the screen. The president of the Iron Hollow MC had been doing that as long as Dax had known him, holding his words back until they cost him something to spend. "You left early," Rowan said. "I found something on CR-17. Silence. Not surprised silence. Rowan Price was not a man who surprised easily, which was either a gift or a damage depending on the day. Dax told him. All of it. The farmhouse, the cellar, the chain, Mila's voice in the dark, Avery's color last night and this morning, Rhonda's call, the money, the sealed court ruling, the 11-day-old report to a sheriff's office that had apparently done nothing. He told it in the order it happened, without emphasis or editorializing, because Rowan didn't need his interpretation. He needed the facts. When Dax finished, Rowan was quiet for 4 seconds. "You're at Garrett's." "Yes." "The father knows where the farmhouse is." "Yes." "So he knows the children are gone." "By now." "Yes." Another silence. Dax could hear, faintly, the sound of a television in the background of wherever Rowan was. Morning news, the weather segment by the tone of it. Rowan watching the weather was one of those small domestic details that never quite fit with the rest of him. "The club can't be involved in this, Dax." "I know." "I'm not saying I don't. I know, Rowan. I'm not calling to ask the club. I'm calling to tell you where I am in case I don't respond to contact for a few days." A beat. "That's not all you're calling for." Dax looked at the bunkhouse wall. Someone, years ago, had tacked a topographic map of the county to the boards above the table. It was yellowed at the edges, some of the tack holes larger than the tacks themselves from being repositioned too many times. "I need to find Elena Cross before the father does," Dax said, "and I need to understand the court ruling, the sealed ruling. That takes someone who knows how to look at documents that aren't meant to be looked at." "That's not a club resource." "No, it's a Vic Tanner resource." The silence this time was different in texture. Vic Tanner was not a member of the Iron Hollow MC. He was a man who had done contracting work of an unspecified nature for a government agency for 8 years and had then stopped doing that and moved to a property 14 miles east of Garrett's ranch and spent his time building furniture and not discussing his past. He was technically a friend of the club, the designation that meant he operated in the same moral orbit without the cut or the obligations. He had, on 2 occasions that Dax knew of, provided assistance that was not available through conventional channels. "I'll make the call," Rowan said. "But Dax." "Yeah." "If this comes back on the club, it won't." "That's not a promise you can make." "No," Dax agreed. "It's not." The call ended. Dax finished his cold coffee and went to tell Lena they needed to contact someone about the children and to talk about how to do it in a way that protected them, rather than delivered them back into the machinery that had already failed them once. Lena's position was firm and not unreasonable. She had examined Avery twice through the night and was satisfied the infant was not in immediate medical crisis, but she was not willing to let that situation continue indefinitely. The missing persons report Rhonda had mentioned meant that whatever Dax was trying to protect the girls from, their existence in the world was already on record. The question wasn't whether to involve Elena Cross. It was how and how fast. They called Elena Cross at 10:15 that morning. Dax made the call from the porch, Lena standing in the doorway, Mila at the kitchen table inside with a book Lena had found from a shelf, and Avery asleep in the crib. The number he had for Elena came from the same public missing persons filing Rhonda had accessed. It rang twice. The woman who answered sounded like someone who had answered her phone in a state of suspended emergency for 2 weeks. The voice of controlled hope, which is a specific and exhausting thing. The hope that makes itself very quiet and contained because the alternative to controlling it is unsustainable. "Yes," she said. "My name is Dax Rourke. I found your daughters." The sound Elena Cross made was not a cry. It was a breath collapsing, something structural giving way behind her sternum, and then silence while she rebuilt enough to speak. "Are they, they're safe. They're healthy. Mila is sitting at a kitchen table eating lunch. Avery had a difficult night, but she's sleeping, and her color is good this morning." He paused. "I need to ask you some questions before I tell you where we are. I need to understand the situation. Not because I don't trust you, because I need to know who else might be looking." A pause on her end. Then quietly, "Warren." "Yes?" "He has a lawyer. He filed a motion 2 days ago. Something about unauthorized removal." Her voice went flat on the last two words in the way voices went flat when they were handling something that would otherwise cause them to break. "He's claiming someone took the children from the property he was using for—" She stopped. "He called it a supervised visit location." Dax thought about the bolt in the concrete floor, the padlock on a 6-year-old's wrist, the cellar with no light and no food, and a chain long enough to reach the stairs, but not the door. "How long has this been going on, oh?" he asked. "The custody situation." "Since Gerald died." Her voice steadied slightly, the way voices did when the subject shifted to facts rather than fear. "Gerald was Warren's father, my father-in-law. He and I were close, closer than Warren liked. When Gerald got sick, he changed his will, left everything to the girls. Warren found out, and the next week he filed for primary custody." A pause. 2 weeks after Gerald died, I came home from work and my children weren't there. Warren said they were with him for the court-approved visitation. 3 days later, they still weren't home. I filed the report. "The restraining order," Dax said. "It was dismissed." Silence on the line. "You've been looking since last night." "The restraining order was dismissed because the judge said I hadn't demonstrated imminent danger." The flat tone was back. "The judge is Harold Fenwick." Dax waited. "Warren Cross and Harold Fenwick have been hunting together for 6 years, Elena said. "I have photographs. I have documentation. I gave it to the sheriff's office 11 days ago, along with a sworn statement about where I believed my children were." She paused. "Nobody called me back." The wind moved through the dry grass of the south pasture. A crow landed on the fence line 30 yards from the porch and turned its head sideways, considering. "I need you to come here," Dax said. "Today. Bring everything you have, the photographs, the documentation, everything." He gave her the address. "Come alone." A pause. "I don't know you." "No, you don't." He looked at the crow on the fence post. "Your daughter Mila told me about Creston Falls. She told me the street name where your house is because you taught it to her in case she got lost. She said you taught her that." He paused. "I think you're the kind of person who does that kind of thing. I think you've been fighting for them the whole time." A long silence. Long enough that he thought she might not answer. 3 hours, Elena said. "I can be there in 3 hours." He went back inside. Rowan called back at 11:40 with Vic Tanner's answer, which was a single sentence relayed through Rowan because Vic did not use phones unless absolutely required. He would be at Garrett's ranch at 2 o'clock, and he wanted the sealed court ruling's case number, which Dax did not have yet, and could Rhonda get it? Dax called Rhonda, who said she'd try, who called back in 20 minutes with a case number that she had obtained through means she declined to specify. The machinery of the afternoon assembled itself in the way that things assembled themselves when people who knew what they were doing moved without being told where to go. Elena Cross arrived at 2:17 in a 12-year-old Civic with a crack in the left rear taillight and 2 cardboard boxes in the back seat. She was 34, dark-haired, with the kind of face that had recently been through something that had burned everything soft away and left the architecture. She parked in front of the main house and climbed out and stood beside the car for a moment without moving, looking at the house as if she was calculating whether she was allowed to want what might be inside it. Lena went out to meet her. Not Dax. He stayed on the porch, watching. The two women spoke for a moment, Lena's hand briefly on Elena's arm, and then Lena brought her inside. Dax stayed on the porch, giving it space. Whatever was happening inside the kitchen was not his to witness in the first moment of it. He heard it anyway through the screen door. A child's voice, careful and uncertain, saying a word that was half statement and half question, and then a sound that was not a word at all, but was unmistakable in its origin and its meaning. He turned away from the screen door and looked at the driveway. Vic Tanner arrived at 2:30 in a truck that was older than Garrett's and better maintained. He was 53, medium height, the kind of physically unremarkable that Dax had learned to recognize as a specific professional cultivation. Men who had spent years not being remembered worked at not being noticed, and eventually they stopped having to work at it. He carried a laptop bag and a second bag that he didn't explain and came up the porch steps without being invited because Vic Tanner did not wait for invitations. "Case number," he said. Dax gave it to him. Vic sat at the porch table, opened the laptop, and started typing. He did not speak further. Dax leaned against the railing and watched the driveway and listened to the sounds inside the house reconfigure themselves gradually. The particular quality of silence between a mother and a child who are being very careful with each other, feeling for the shape of something that used to be there. He was still on the porch when Garrett's truck came up the driveway from the direction of the south gate, which was the direction the county road ran, and Garrett was not driving it. Dax was off the railing and at the porch steps before the truck fully stopped. The driver was a young man, mid-20s, with a cut on his back, a prospect's patch, which meant he was iron hollow, and he was alone, and he looked like he'd been driving fast and deliberately. He climbed out and said Dax's name like it was a destination he'd been heading toward. His name was Cole, and he'd been with the club 8 months, and he said, "Rowan sent me. There's a situation." "What situation?" "Warren Cross contacted a lawyer in Harlan County this morning, filed an emergency motion for law enforcement to locate and return the children. He's claiming abduction." Cole's jaw was tight. The lawyer also filed a complaint against an unknown party for trespassing and property removal at a location on CR 17. He paused. The Harlan County Sheriff's Office assigned a deputy to it this morning. Deputy's name is Aldridge. "Aldridge," Dax said. "Rowan says you'd know the name." He did know the name. Aldridge was a deputy who had, 2 years prior, declined to take a report from a club member's sister about a domestic situation because the perpetrator was a man Aldridge went to church with. The sister had ended up in the hospital 6 weeks later. Dax knew the name the way you knew the names of specific tools that had been misused in front of you. "How much time?" Dax said. "Rowan doesn't know, but the motion's on record and the deputy's been assigned. So," Dax looked at the house, at the windows, at the driveway, and the county road beyond the gate. "Go get Garrett," he said. "He's in the south barn. Tell him I need him up here." Cole nodded and moved. Dax went back to the porch and stood over Vic Tanner's shoulder. On the screen was a document that was legally sealed and therefore not available to the public and therefore present on Vic's screen through a process Dax was not going to ask about. "Talk to me," Dax said. "The custody ruling," Vic said. "Judge Fenwick. Standard language, except..." He scrolled. "The evidentiary basis for granting primary custody to Warren Cross includes 2 assessments from a family services evaluator named Donna Hirsch. Both assessments characterize Elena Cross as emotionally unstable, a flight risk, and a potential danger to the children's well-being." Paused. "Donna Hirsch does not appear in the Harlan County Family Services Directory or the state registry." He looked up at Dax. "She doesn't exist." The porch held that information for a moment. "He manufactured the evaluator," Dax said. "The assessments, the credentials, the signature. The letterhead is close, but the county seal is slightly off. Wrong year on the update cycle." Vic turned the laptop so Dax could see. Someone who knew what to look for could catch it. Someone who trusted the court process wouldn't bother looking. Fenwick had to know. Or Fenwick was presented with documentation that looked legitimate and didn't verify it because he had no reason to. Vic paused. Or he had every reason to not verify it. Inside the house, Mila's voice came through the screen door again. Something specific, something directed at her mother. Too low for Dax to make out the words, but the tone had changed. Less careful. Still tentative, but moving in the direction of something. Garrett came up from the south barn with Cole behind him, and Dax brought Garrett up to speed in 90 seconds on the porch, while Vic kept working. Garrett listened without interrupting, a skill that Dax had always respected in him. The ability to receive information without spending the energy to react while it was still arriving. "Aldridge won't have a warrant yet," Garrett said when Dax finished. "No, but he'll have the motion as justification for a welfare check. He can come here legally as soon as he locates us." Dax paused. "Someone will locate us. Warren Cross has resources, and he has time to use them." "Then we need to move the picture." Dax looked at him. "What do you mean?" "The children being here, Elena being here. This location." Garrett's voice was even, considered. Right now, if Aldridge comes here, he finds children who were reported abducted by an unknown party, he finds the reporting party's estranged wife, and he finds you. That picture reads a specific way regardless of what's actually true. He paused. If we move the picture, it reads different. Where? Garrett said nothing for a moment. Dax watched his face. You know where, Garrett said. He meant the secondary property. 40 acres on the other side of the ridge that Garrett had purchased 8 years ago with the intention of expanding the cattle operation and had never gotten around to because Lena's health that year had redirected everything. There was a cabin on it that Garrett kept stocked and weatherproofed. No listed address. Purchased under an LLC that Garrett had established for the business expansion and never dissolved. The property existed in county records, but the connection to Garrett Foles required multiple layers of documentation to establish. Lena will want to come, Dax said. Lena is already going to want to come, Garrett said. I don't have any say in what Lena does. Cole was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, listening to this exchange, with the very specific expression of a young man calculating whether he was supposed to be part of the decision or outside it. Dax looked at him. You didn't come here. No, sir. You went back to the chapter after Rowan sent you. Yes, sir. Tell Rowan the situation has developed. Tell him I need 48 hours and I need the club not to generate any noise around this. No presence in Harlan County. No communication with anyone in the sheriff's office. Cole nodded once, got in the truck, and left. Garrett went inside to talk to Lena. Dax stayed on the porch with Vic Tanner, who was still working through the sealed documents with the focused calm of a man who found the technical problem more interesting than the circumstances around it. The property, Vic said without looking up, in the estate. You know what it is? $400,000 in assets and an unassessed property component, Dax said. The unassessed component is a parcel in Creston Falls, commercial property. Gerald Cross ran a feed and supply business for 40 years. When he died, the business property transferred to the estate. Vic scrolled. The assessed commercial property value as of the last county tax record is $1.1 million. He paused. The probate can't close until the beneficiaries, the girls, have a legal guardian who can execute on their behalf. Warren Cross petitioned the court to be appointed that guardian 5 months ago. The petition was denied because of Elena Cross's counterclaim. Another pause. If something happened to the girls, the petition would have to be refiled under different circumstances, Dax said, with no counterclaim. The air on the porch was very still. Somewhere behind the barn, one of the cattle made a sound, low and carrying. Dax turned and went inside the house. Elena Cross was at the kitchen table. Mila was beside her, not touching her, not quite, but the distance between them was less than a foot and had the quality of a distance that was being negotiated rather than maintained. Avery was in Elena's arms, and Elena was holding the infant with a particular kind of careful that said she was still afraid she'd have her taken away again if she moved wrong. Lena was at the counter, not looking at anyone directly. Garrett was in the kitchen doorway. Dax sat across from Elena. I need to tell you what I know, he said. And then I need you to tell me what you know, and then we need to move. Elena looked at him. Her eyes were dark and steady, and they'd been doing this, holding steady, for a long time. He could see that. The particular steadiness of someone who'd spent weeks not being allowed to fall apart. The court ruling was based on fabricated evidence, Dax said. The family services evaluator doesn't exist. That means the custody grant can be challenged, and with what Vic has found, it can probably be overturned. But that takes time and a lawyer who can work fast and is willing to go up against Fenwick. He paused. Warren Cross is currently filing an emergency motion claiming the children were abducted. He has a deputy who is willing to act on that motion. Elena's jaw tightened. Aldridge. You know him. He was at the hearing. He testified as a character witness for Warren. Dax nodded. I need you to make 2 calls. Your lawyer, whoever you've been working with, I fired my last lawyer. I ran out of money. She said it without self-pity. Information delivered. Dax looked at Garrett. Garrett looked back. I know someone, Garrett said. She doesn't work for free, but she works for what people have. He paused. I'll make the call. Elena looked at him for a moment, the look of a woman trying to calculate what something costs when the person offering it doesn't name a price. "Why?" she said. "Not to Garrett, to Dax." The kitchen was quiet. Lena had put down whatever she'd been doing at the counter. Mila was watching Dax with those careful dark eyes. "Because the alternative is letting it stand," Dax said, "and I don't do that." It wasn't an explanation. He didn't have one she'd understand yet. What he had was the weight of a padlock in his jacket pocket and a very clear mental image of a bolt set in concrete and a 6-year-old girl who'd been managing an infant's feeding schedule in her head for days in the dark because somebody had to, and she was the only one there. Elena held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. "We need to move in the next hour," Dax said. "Garrett will explain where. Pack what you have. Keep it to what fits in one bag." He stood. Mila looked at him. "You did a good job," he said. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him last night on the porch railing of the bunkhouse when he'd told her someone was coming, like she was weighing it, like she had a scale somewhere inside her that had been calibrated by experience rather than optimism. "Okay," she said. He went back to the porch. Vic Tanner was closing the laptop. "I can send you everything I found," Vic said. "Encrypted. You'll need it in a format the lawyer can use." "Do it." Vic looked at him. "The deputy? Aldridge. If he gets to this location before you're gone, I know." "You have a prior," Vic said. "Flat. Informational. The emergency motion names an unknown party. If Aldridge connects the Harley to CR-17, the unknown party stops being unknown." "I know that too." "Dax." He looked at Vic. "I'm not trying to tell you what to do," Vic said. "I'm trying to make sure you know the shape of what you're walking into." "I've been walking into things with bad shapes for a long time," Dax said. "At least this time I know what's on the other side." Vic considered this. Then he picked up his bags and went to his truck. The next 40 minutes were motion and efficiency. Lena packing medical supplies and Avery's essentials, Garrett handling the logistics of the secondary property with the competence of a man who'd run an operation for 30 years and knew that good preparation was what kept crises from becoming disasters. Elena moved through the main house with the focused economy of a woman who had learned to pack fast because situations had required it. Mila helped in the way that a child with her particular history helped, anticipating needs before they were stated, carrying things without being asked, keeping track of Avery's location at all times. Dax loaded his Harley into the truck bed again. He couldn't ride with the chain failure still unresolved, but there was a part of him that wanted the motorcycle close. It was irrational. He knew it was irrational. He loaded it anyway. They were off the main ranch property in 43 minutes. The secondary property cabin was a 40-minute drive on unpaved roads, and they arrived in late afternoon light that came through the pines at a low angle, the kind of light that made everything look amber and considered, like the world was thinking about something. The cabin was solid. 2 bedrooms, a main room with a wood stove, a kitchen with running water off a pressure tank. Garrett had built it with the intention of living in it during the expansion years, and it showed in the quality of the bones. They got the children settled. Lena took the second bedroom with Elena and the girls. Garrett and Dax took the main room. At 9:17 that night, Dax's phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize that consisted of 5 words. Aldridge visited the main ranch. He showed it to Garrett. Garrett read it and said, "Vic." "Yeah." "You have a warrant?" "Text doesn't say." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Outside, the pines moved in the night wind, a different sound than the open ranch. Closer, more particular, a sound with texture. "If he had a warrant," Garrett said, "it gets complicated. If he didn't, then Warren Cross sent a deputy on a welfare pretext to find out if the children were here, without a warrant." Dax looked at the phone. "Which tells us Aldridge is operating outside the scope of the motion. Operating as a favor." "Yeah." The fire in the wood stove was doing its job, the cabin holding warmth against the October night, and the 2 men sat with that information and the fire for a while without saying anything. Then Mila appeared in the doorway to the second bedroom in pajamas that Lena had produced from somewhere. Not the right size, slightly large, but clean. She looked at Dax. "I can't sleep," she said. "That's okay." She came and sat at the table near the wood stove, not close to either man, just present in the room. Garrett got up and got her a glass of water and set it in front of her and went back to his chair. After a moment, she said, "My dad's going to try to take us back." "He's trying," Dax said. "Yes." "Can he?" Dax looked at her. He could have given her a comfortable answer. The comfortable answer was that everything was going to be fine, that the adults had it handled, that she didn't need to think about it. He looked at her, and she looked back at him with those eyes that had a scale inside them, and he knew the comfortable answer was going to register on that scale as false. "He has a lawyer, and he has a deputy who'll work for him," Dax said. "We have a lawyer who's going to fight the custody ruling in court on the grounds that it was based on evidence that didn't exist. The evidence Vic found today is enough to get the ruling overturned." He paused. "It's going to take time, and it might get hard before it gets easier." Mila absorbed this. "But you'll still be here." It wasn't a question exactly. It was the kind of statement that was a question dressed as something more confident, because confidence was cheaper to maintain than hope. "I'll still be here," Dax said. She nodded, drank her water, sat for another few minutes in the warmth of the wood stove while Garrett and Dax were quiet around her, not performing stillness but genuinely inside it, the way men sat who had learned that presence didn't require talking. Then she went back to bed. Garrett said after a while, "You know this gets harder." "Yeah." "Warren Cross isn't going to stop because of a sealed document and a deputy who came up empty at the ranch. He's going to escalate." "I know. The money is $1.1 million plus whatever the liquid assets are. People do more than chain their kids in a basement for $1.1 million. "I know that too," Dax said. "What are you going to do?" Dax looked at the fire, at the orange light moving inside the iron stove, finding its way through the vent slots, casting moving shapes on the wood floor. "Whatever I have to," he said. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Rowan called me this afternoon, before you moved everyone." Dax looked at him. "He said the club can't be involved." Garrett's voice was careful and deliberate. "He also said that the Iron Hollow MC currently has 7 members who have each, separately and without coordination, offered to take personal time in the vicinity of whatever location might need monitoring in the next few days." Dax said nothing. "Rowan said to tell you that he's not authorizing anything. He's not directing anything. He's simply relaying information about what individual members intend to do with their personal time." Garrett paused. "He said to tell you that these are 7 individuals who happen to ride motorcycles, and who will be riding them in a general eastern direction starting tomorrow morning." The fire moved inside the stove. "He also said," Garrett continued very quietly, "to tell you that the thing you found in that cellar, he said you'd know what he meant. That some things you don't ride past, even when riding past is safer." Dax looked at the floor, at the moving orange shapes. Outside in the pine dark, somewhere on the ridgeline, something moved, a deer probably, or the wind through the upper branches. But the sound it made was a single sharp crack, and both men were still for a moment, heads up, attending to it. It resolved into nothing. A branch, the cold contracting wood. But for a moment, in the fraction of a second before it resolved, Dax felt the thing he'd been trying not to feel since he found Mila in that cellar. Not the anger, not the purpose, but the other thing underneath them both, the old thing, the particular cold of knowing that the person who had done this to those children was still out there and was not finished and had resources and motivation, and someone in the county sheriff's office who picked up the phone when he called. And in the morning, Dax Rourke was going to ride directly toward all of it. He just didn't know yet that Warren Cross had made a call of his own that evening, not to his lawyer, not to Aldridge, to a man whose name didn't appear on any of the documents Vic Tanner had pulled, a man whose relationship to Warren Cross was the one piece of the picture that nobody had looked for yet, because nobody knew it existed. And that man had already left his house. And he was not. The crack in the pines resolved into nothing. But Dax didn't go back to sleep. He sat in the chair by the wood stove until the fire burned down to coals and the cabin went from warm to merely not cold, and he thought about the sentence he'd been sitting inside since Vic Tanner had closed his laptop and driven away. Nobody knew it existed. and what it meant that there was a piece of the picture nobody had looked for. At 4:19 in the morning, his phone buzzed. Not a call. A text from Vic's number, 3 words, "Come alone, now." He pulled on his jacket and boots without waking Garrett and went out into the pine dark. Vic's truck was at the end of the access road, engine idling, no headlights. Dax walked to it through the cold and the dark, with his breath making small clouds and the pine needles wet under his boots from overnight condensation. He climbed into the passenger seat. The cab smelled of coffee from a thermos wedged between the seats, and something else. The particular smell of a man who'd been working through the night, close air and focus. Vic had the laptop open on the dash, angled toward Dax. On the screen was a photograph. Scanned, the original clearly physical, the paper aged at the edges. 2 men standing in front of a building Dax didn't recognize, arms around each other's shoulders, both grinning at the camera with the uninhibited confidence of men who believed the photograph would never be used against them. One of the men was Warren Cross, younger, maybe 15 years ago, but recognizable from the photographs Elena had brought in her cardboard boxes. The other man was Judge Harold Fenwick. "Brothers," Vic said, "not hunting buddies." Brothers. Same mother, different fathers. Fenwick's mother remarried when he was 9. Warren Cross was 7. He paused. Different last names, never lived in the same county as adults. Nobody connected them. Dax looked at the photograph. "Gerald Cross knew," Vic said. "There's a letter, handwritten, in Gerald's papers, never sent. He was going to send it to an attorney in the state capitol the week he died." Vic scrolled to a scanned document. He'd found out about the relationship 3 months before his death. He'd found out about the hunting trips, which were actually monthly meetings at a property Fenwick owns in the next county. And he'd found out what they were planning to do with the estate. He paused. Gerald wrote it all down. Names, dates, the bank account Warren opened in anticipation of the probate closing. Dax read the letter on the screen. Gerald Cross had been a man who wrote the way he probably talked. Plainly, without dramatics. Putting one fact in front of the next with the same patient methodology he'd probably used to build a feed and supply business over 40 years. The letter was 4 paragraphs. By the 3rd paragraph, Dax's jaw had tightened enough that he could feel it in his back teeth. "Where did you find this?" he said. "Gerald's estate files. The attorney handling probate, the one in Creston Falls, received Gerald's personal papers as part of the estate documentation. The letter was in a sealed envelope marked to be opened by the estate attorney upon my death. The attorney opened it, read it, and—" Vic paused. "Did nothing." Dax looked at him. "The attorney's name is Stuart Pell. He's been the Cross family attorney for 22 years. Vic closed the laptop. "He's also the man Warren called last night, after Aldridge came up empty at the ranch." The truck idled. The pines around them were black against a sky that was starting to go from black to something that wasn't quite dark anymore. Not light, just the suggestion of it, the sky acknowledging that morning was coming without committing to it. "Stuart Pell is the piece nobody looked for," Dax said. "He's also the piece that makes the whole thing prosecutable," Vic said. "If Gerald's letter exists and Pell suppressed it, that's obstruction. If Pell facilitated the fabricated evaluator documentation, and I think he did, the letterhead format matches his firm's style closely enough to be a template. That's fraud." He paused. "And if Pell tells Warren Cross that someone has been looking at sealed documents in Gerald's estate papers, Warren knows someone has found something," Dax said. "By now, yes. The man he called. The one who left his house." "I don't have a name yet," Vic said. "The call from Warren's cell to an unregistered number. I know the call happened because I can see the gap in the call log where it was deleted. Deleted calls don't disappear cleanly unless you know exactly what you're doing, and Warren Cross doesn't strike me as someone who knows exactly what he's doing with call logs." He paused. "Which means someone told him to make the call, told him what number, and told him to delete it afterward. Someone who does know what they're doing." "Someone who has done this before," Vic said. "Warren Cross is greedy and mean, and he has a compliant judge and a useful deputy. But this," he gestured at the laptop, "this level of construction, the fabricated evaluator, the sealed ruling, the suppressed letter, the coordinated probate obstruction. Warren Cross didn't architect this. He's not that sophisticated. Dax sat with that for a moment. Pell, he said. Pell, Vic agreed. How long has Pell been running this? The Cross family account goes back 22 years. I can only see so far into what he's done in that time, but Vic opened the laptop again. Different document. Gerald Cross is not the first client of Stuart Pell's who died with an estate and minor beneficiaries. There are 2 prior cases in the county record. Both involved minor beneficiaries. Both involved contested custody. Both were handled by Judge Fenwick. He looked at Dax. In both prior cases, the estates were liquidated within 18 months of probate closing. The beneficiaries in both cases, children who were subsequently raised by the contesting parent, received nothing upon reaching adulthood. He paused. Because there was nothing left to receive. The thing that moved through Dax then was not surprise. It was colder than surprise and more specific. The feeling of a shape becoming clear. The understanding that what he'd found in that cellar was not an isolated act of cruelty by one bad man, but the end result of a system that had been running long enough to have prior iterations, prior victims, prior children who had grown into adults with empty hands and no record of why. How old are those cases, he said. 8 years and 12 years. The children, where are they now? I don't know yet. Dax got out of the truck. He stood in the pine dark for a moment with his hands in his jacket pockets and his breath making clouds in the cold working at his collar, and he thought about a bolt in a concrete floor and a padlock, and a 6-year-old girl who had calibrated her hope very precisely to avoid the cost of having too much of it. He went back into the truck. I need everything you have, he said. Every document. The letter, the fabricated assessments, the prior cases, the call log gap, the photograph. Everything in a format that can be handed to an attorney and used in court. I've been compiling it since 3 a.m, Vic said. It'll be ready in an hour. Send it to Garrett's lawyer contact. Send it to Rhonda as well. 2 copies, different channels. Vic nodded. Vic, Dax paused. The man Warren called, the unregistered number. I need that name. I'm working on it. Work faster. He got out of the truck and walked back to the cabin through the pine dark and the cold and the suggestion of morning that was starting to work its way into the sky above the ridge line. He went inside quietly, found the wood stove down to gray ash, rebuilt it with the efficiency of someone who'd done it many times, and sat in front of it while the kindling caught and the warmth began again. He was sitting there when Garrett appeared from the back of the cabin at 5:40, fully dressed, moving with the quiet deliberateness of a man who slept light and woke ready. Garrett looked at him, at the rebuilt fire, at the jacket Dax was still wearing. Vic, Dax said. What did he find? Dax told him. Garrett sat down across from him and listened without interrupting, the same as always. And when Dax finished, Garrett was quiet for a long moment, looking at the fire. Pell, Garrett said. Yes. He's going to tell Warren we're close to something. He already has. So whoever Warren called is already moving, Dax said, and we don't have a name. Garrett looked at him. You need to call Rowan. I know. Not to ask the club, Garrett said carefully, but those 7 members who are riding east this morning. They need to know the shape has changed. Dax pulled out his phone. It's not just a deputy and a lawyer and a bad court ruling. There's someone else in this that we haven't seen yet, and that someone has done this before. He called Rowan at 5:53. Rowan picked up on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. Dax told him everything, the photograph, the brothers, Gerald's letter, the prior cases, the unregistered call. Rowan's side of the line was completely quiet through all of it. Not the quiet of a man processing. The quiet of a man who had already been thinking about something and was now hearing the information that confirmed the shape of the thing he'd been thinking about. I know a Stuart Pell, Rowan said when Dax finished. Dax went still. Not personally, but the name. Rowan paused. 2 years ago, Chapter over in Millhaven had a situation. Member's elderly father, estate issue, the son found out after the father died that the estate had been partially liquidated before probate closed. Attorney involved was a firm in Creston Falls. The member tried to pursue it, but ran out of money for legal fees. A pause. I never heard the attorney's name directly, but the member, his name was Cutter, described the attorney as a man who'd been doing business in that county for 20-something years and had a hunting property in the next county over. Dax looked at Garrett. Pell has a hunting property in the next county, Dax said. That's where Fenwick and Warren meet. I know, Rowan said, quietly, the quiet of something settling. Dax, Cutter's father's estate involved minor beneficiaries. Cutter had 2 nephews, his brother's boys, who were named in the will. The brother had full custody. By the time probate closed, the estate was gone, and the brother had moved with the boys to a different state. He paused. Cutter's been trying to find those boys for 2 years. The fire in the wood stove had caught fully now, the iron beginning to tick as it expanded, the warmth spreading into the room in the gradual, reliable way that wood heat did. Not dramatic, just present. This is the 3rd time, Dax said. Not a question. At least, Rowan said. Dax, the 7 members, they're already on the road. I need them here, not in Harlan County. If Pell has told Warren that someone's been looking at documents, the cabin is the target, Rowan said. Yes, I understand. A pause. ETA 2 hours. Tell them to come in from the north road. Garrett will leave the gate open. The call ended. Garrett was already on his feet. He didn't ask what had been said. He'd heard enough from Dax's side. He pulled on his coat and went out to deal with the north gate. Dax sat for one more moment in front of the fire. In the second bedroom, he could hear, faintly, the sound of the cabin's occupants beginning to wake. A movement, the soft sound of Avery making a morning sound, Lena's voice low and immediate in response. The sounds of a household assembling itself for another day, ordinary sounds, the kind that a 6-year-old girl had not heard in whatever she considered ordinary for a very long time. He stood and went to the kitchen and started coffee. Elena came out of the bedroom at 6:15, Avery on her hip, moving with the particular, careful alertness of a woman who'd slept in a strange place while remaining available to danger. She stopped when she saw Dax at the kitchen counter. Something happened, she said. Yes, I'll tell you when Mila's still asleep. Elena looked at him for a moment, then transferred Avery to the other hip and came to the kitchen counter and stood beside him while the coffee made itself and the cabin morning assembled around them. Stuart Pell, Dax said quietly, watching the coffee. He felt rather than saw her reaction, a stillness that was different from her normal stillness, a stillness that had history in it. He's been Warren's family attorney since before I met Warren, she said. He handled everything, the wedding, the property, Gerald's estate. She stopped. Did you ever speak with him directly about the custody case? He was across the table from me at the second hearing. He represented Warren. He was... She stopped again. When she continued, her voice was careful in the way of someone choosing each word. He was very calm, very organized. He had documents I'd never seen, assessment reports I'd never been contacted for, evaluations I wasn't informed were happening. She paused. I asked my lawyer about the evaluator. She'd never heard of her. We tried to verify the credentials and kept hitting dead ends. She looked at Dax. My lawyer said the court was unlikely to question documents submitted by an established local attorney. Your lawyer was right about that, Dax said. Pell knew exactly what he was submitting and exactly how much scrutiny it would receive. It was all fabricated. All of it. Elena was quiet. Avery made a sound, and Elena adjusted her grip, automatic, the motion of a body that had recalibrated itself around the specific weight and need of this particular child after years of absence, finding the old knowledge still resident in her arms and hands. How many times has he done this? Elena said. Dax poured the coffee, set a mug in front of her. We're still counting. She picked up the mug with her free hand and held it without drinking from it, looking at the middle distance above the kitchen counter. He told Gerald, she said. Warren told Gerald that I was unstable, that I'd been unfaithful, that the girls weren't safe with me. She paused. Gerald didn't believe him. That's why Gerald changed the will. He'd seen enough to know what Warren was. He was trying to protect the girls even after he was gone. She looked at Dax. And then he died, and Pell had the letter and did nothing. Pell had the letter and suppressed it, Dax said. There's a difference. Suppressing it is criminal. Can you prove it? Vic can prove it. She finally drank the coffee, held the mug against her mouth for a moment after, the warmth of it. There's someone else, Dax said. Warren made a call last night that we can't fully trace yet. Someone who's not Pell and not Aldridge. Someone with the capability to run this kind of operation without leaving the standard traces. He kept his voice even. Do you know of anyone in Warren's life who has that kind of background? Military, law enforcement, private investigation? Elena set down the mug. Her face had gone to the flat tone, the information delivery tone he'd heard on the phone the day before. His brother, she said. Dax looked at her. Not Fenwick, she said. Warren has another half-brother, older. His name is Ray Stokes. Different mother. She paused. I met him twice in the years Warren and I were married, both times at Pell's hunting property. He was introduced as a business associate. She looked at the counter. He was ex-military. Special operations of some kind, Warren said. After he left the service, he did private work. Warren said he moved around a lot. She paused. He scared me. Not the way dangerous people usually scared me. The way people scared me who didn't feel the things that stopped normal people from doing certain things. Dax put down his coffee mug. He scared you more than Warren, he said. Warren is mean and greedy and he wants things, Elena said. That's something I can understand and anticipate. Ray Stokes? She stopped, started again. Ray Stokes looked at my daughters when they were 3 and 8 months old, and he smiled at them the way you'd smile at a line item on a budget, like they were units of a calculation. She looked at Dax. I told myself I was imagining it. You weren't imagining it, Dax said. She looked at him. He held her gaze. Ray Stokes is the one Warren called, Dax said, and he left his house last night. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window now, real light, the thin, clear light of an October morning in the mountains, and it found Elena Cross's face and showed everything in it. The exhaustion, the anger, the love that had been running without fuel for 2 weeks on pure refusal to stop, and underneath all of that, the cold, specific fear of a mother who has just been told that the worst thing she can imagine has a name, and that name has already left the building. The sound of boots outside, 2 sets, deliberate, coming around from the north side of the cabin, brought Dax off the kitchen counter and to the window in a single motion. Garrett, coming back from the north gate, and beside him, a man Dax hadn't seen in 18 months, broad, weathered, wearing a cut with a road captain patch, and the particular economy of movement of someone who had been on a motorcycle for 2 hours in the October cold and arrived without complaint. His name was Webb. He was 44 and he'd done 2 tours, and he'd been riding with Iron Hollow for 7 years, and he was the first of 7. They came in through the back door and Webb shook Dax's hand without preamble and said, Rowan sends his regards. The others are 20 minutes behind me. How was the road? Clear until the county line, then a deputy running plates on the highway. Webb paused. He ran 3 of us. We had nothing on our records that gave him cause, and he let us go. Another pause. He was running Iron Hollow patches specifically, wasn't random. Aldridge, or someone working the same information. The plates check meant someone had put out information about the club's involvement, which meant Pell had told Warren more than the documents were being examined. He'd told him who was involved, which meant Dax's name was now on Warren Cross's list, which meant that Ray Stokes, wherever he was, had a name attached to the location he was looking for. The 6 remaining members arrived over the next 25 minutes in staggered intervals, coming in from the north road as instructed, parking the bikes in the tree line behind the cabin where they couldn't be seen from the access road. They were men of various ages and sizes and histories, but they moved with a collective economy that said they'd operated in coordinated spaces before, military, security, or simply years of riding together through situations that required it. They came in, assessed the cabin, assessed the people in it, said nothing that wasn't necessary. Mila appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at 7 men in leather jackets who filled the main room of the cabin and said nothing for a moment. Then she looked at Dax. Are they yours? She asked. They ride with me, Dax said. She considered this. Then she came into the main room and sat at the table the way she always sat, with her back to the wall and a clear sightline to the door, and watched the men assess the space and one another. Webb crouched to her level. "You must be Mila." She looked at him steadily. "Are you going to help?" "That's the plan." "Okay," she said. Same words she'd said to Dax the night before. The same calibrated acceptance. The men reorganized the cabin's defensive positioning without being asked. 2 to the tree line with sight lines to the access road, 1 at the north gate, the remaining 4 in rotation. It happened with a quietness that was more than professional. It was the quietness of men who understood, without being told, that there were children in the building who had already experienced the specific terror of being found by someone who meant them harm, and that introducing more visible threat into the environment wasn't useful. Webb came to stand beside Dax near the window. "Rowan briefed me on the full picture," he said quietly. "Stokes. You know the name?" "I know the type," Webb said. "Ex-Special Operations private contractor. They don't do things impulsively. They plan. They gather intelligence. They identify variables." He paused. "He knows we're here by now. He knows the number of people. He knows the children are here. How long before he moves?" "Depends on what his objective is. If his objective is the children..." Webb stopped. "If his objective is to recover the children and remove the problem." "Me," Dax said. "And anyone standing near you," Webb said. "He won't move until he has an advantage, but he'll manufacture one if he needs to." Dax's phone buzzed. Vic. He stepped outside to take it, the cold immediately at work on his neck and hands, the morning light flat and pale through the pines. "Ray Stokes," Vic said. 11 years special operations, 2 years private security, 4 years of nothing in any database I can reach." A pause. "The nothing is the part that bothers me. Not retired nothing, maintained nothing. Someone has been actively maintaining the absence of Ray Stokes from searchable records for 4 years. Who does that? People with institutional access, Vic said. Law enforcement, intelligence, or people who work for those people. He went private, Dax said. Private contractor. The kind of private contractor who would have institutional contacts willing to scrub his digital footprint, Vic said. Yes, he paused. Dax, I found one thing that wasn't scrubbed. A property registration in Harlan County, 7 years ago, before someone started cleaning the record. A cabin on 12 acres, 2 miles from the county line, registered to a company name that traces back to Stokes through 2 shell entities. A pause. The property is 11 miles from where you are. 11 miles? He's not coming yet, Vic said. If he were coming, you'd know by now. He's watching, establishing. A pause. Dax, there's one more thing. Dax waited. The 2 prior cases, the children from those estates. Vic's voice had changed slightly, still controlled, but with something beneath the control. I found them. They're adults now. I found them because I found their medical records, which were the one thing that didn't get cleaned up because nobody thought to clean them up. He stopped. Both children spent time in a psychiatric facility in the year following the probate closing. Both were discharged with no further record. Both have no current findable address. He paused. The records indicate their admissions were authorized by the custodial parent, and the diagnoses... He stopped again. The diagnoses in both cases were inconsistent with the clinical notes. Someone altered the admissions paperwork. Dax stood in the cold and the pale morning light with the phone against his ear and understood for the first time the full shape of what he was standing inside. This wasn't about money. The money was the reason, but the mechanism was something else. A system for eliminating witnesses, eliminating complications, eliminating the human beings who stood between Warren Cross and Stuart Pell and whatever they wanted. Children who went into psychiatric facilities under falsified diagnoses didn't come out and testify. They came out discredited, or they didn't come out at all in any functional sense. Mila and Avery were not the target of a greedy father who wanted an inheritance. They were 2 more iterations of a process that had run at least twice before without consequence. And Ray Stokes was the part of the process that handled the complications, the unforeseen variables. The wounded biker who'd heard a sound he shouldn't have heard on a county road at dusk and had gone toward it instead of away from it. "Vic," Dax said, "get everything to the lawyer. Everything. Not tomorrow. In the next hour." "Already sending." "And Vic." He paused. "Thank you." A brief silence on Vic's end, the silence of a man unused to being thanked. "Don't let them get to the kids," Vic said, and ended the call. Dax stood outside for a moment longer. The pines moved in the cold morning air. Somewhere above the ridge, a hawk circled in the pale sky, patient and economical, working the thermals. He thought about what Rowan had said on the phone that morning, relayed through Garrett. Some things you don't ride past. He thought about the two children from the prior cases, adults now with no findable address, their childhoods dismantled by a mechanism so practiced it had barely left a mark in the record except in clinical notes that nobody thought to alter because nobody expected anyone to look. He went back inside. Webb looked at him from across the room. "He's 11 miles out," Dax said. "He's watching." Webb nodded once. "Then we need to give him something to watch that isn't this." Dax looked at him. "We moved the children again," Webb said. "Different direction. He's got eyes on this location. We don't know how. Surveillance equipment, most likely. We moved the children and Lena and Elena in a vehicle he hasn't clocked yet. We leave enough presence here to look like everyone's still in the building." He paused. "And we draw him in." "That makes this location the target," Dax said. "Yes." "With your people inside it." "Yes," Webb said. "Dax, that's what we're here for." The fire in the wood stove ticked. The cabin held its warmth against the morning. In the kitchen, Mila was sitting at the table with Avery in her lap, showing the infant something in her hands. A small pine cone she'd picked up somewhere, turning it so Avery could see each face of it, narrating quietly in a voice too low to make out from across the room. Dax watched them for a moment. Then he looked at Webb and at the 6 men disposed around the cabin in positions that said everything about what they understood their function to be. "Make the call to Garrett's contact," Dax said. "The lawyer. Tell her we need a court appearance today. Not tomorrow. Today." He paused. "Tell her we have Gerald Cross's letter, fabricated court documents, a suppressed estate, and 2 prior victims with medical records that contradict their diagnoses." He paused once more. "Tell her the man who built this system is 11 miles away and is not going to wait much longer." Webb was already reaching for his phone. Dax walked to the kitchen and crouched beside Mila's chair. She looked at him. He held her gaze. "We're going to move you again," he said. "You and Avery and your mom, somewhere safer." She looked at him with the scale behind her eyes, the calibrated hope. "Are you coming?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, at the pine cone in her small hands, at Avery watching him with the alert, uncomplicated attention of an infant who had learned, in the last 48 hours, that there were people in the world who held you carefully. "Not this time," he said, "but I'll be where I need to be." Mila looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at Avery, and she looked back at Dax. And she said, with the precision of a child who had learned the hard way to say exactly what she meant and no more, "Don't get hurt." Outside, through the pine trees, barely audible over the wind and the small sounds of the cabin mourning, Dax heard something that should not have been there. The sound of a diesel engine. Not a motorcycle. Something heavier. Idling at a distance and then going quiet. The way an engine went quiet when someone cut it deliberately. When someone wanted to arrive somewhere without the engine announcing. The engine had been running. Now it wasn't. Dax was moving before the silence fully registered. Back through the kitchen doorway, hand on Webb's arm, 2 words. "He's here." Webb didn't ask. He turned and the cabin reorganized itself in under 10 seconds. The 6 men shifting to positions they'd already identified. The particular efficiency of people who had rehearsed this kind of thing in contexts that were not rehearsals. No raised voices, no scrambling, just bodies moving to where they needed to be with the economy of men who understood that speed and noise were not the same thing. "Elena." Dax's voice was low and flat. "Back bedroom. Take the girls. Lock the door and put the dresser against it. Don't open it for anyone except Lena's voice." Elena didn't argue. She was already moving, Avery pulled tight against her chest, her free hand finding Mila's wrist and pulling her toward the hallway. Mila looked back at Dax once, just once, and then she was through the bedroom door and it closed behind them. Lena stood in the kitchen doorway. Dax looked at her. "I'm not going in there," she said. "I know," he said. Webb was at the front window, 2 inches from the glass, looking through the gap in the curtain at the tree line. One vehicle. 11 o'clock from the front door. He parked it in the pines. He paused. "I count 2 on foot, moving through the tree line toward the north side." "Too visible," Dax said. "Too visible," Webb agreed. The distinction mattered. One of the men, a rider named Patch, 50 years old, 230 pounds of former Marine who spoke maybe 40 words on a good day, came in from the back door and said, "Third one came around the south. He's carrying." "How far?" 60 yards, staying in the trees." 3 visible. A man like Ray Stokes didn't operate with 3. He operated with enough, and enough was always one more than you expected. Dax pulled his phone and called Vic. 1 ring. "We have contact. 3 visible, probable 4th. I need you to call Garrett's lawyer contact right now and tell her to file the emergency motion immediately. Whatever she has. Don't wait for the full package. File now." "Filing in the next 10 minutes, Vic said. "Already on the phone with her." He paused. "Dax, Aldridge left the county sheriff's office 40 minutes ago. He's not on dispatch. He's running dark." "Direction?" "East." Dax ended the call. East was here. Webb said, "They're not moving yet." "He's waiting for Aldridge," Dax said. "He wants the badge when the door comes open. Legal cover." "How long?" 20 minutes? Maybe 30. "Then we have 20 minutes, Webb said. He turned from the window, and in the flat morning light coming through the curtain gap, his face had the quality it always had when the situation clarified down to its essential geometry. Not calm exactly, but resolved. The face of a man who had found, over a long time in difficult places, that fear was a navigation tool and not a destination. The next 17 minutes were the specific tension of men waiting in a contained space while other men waited outside it, each side aware of the other, neither side moving because the conditions weren't right yet. The fire in the wood stove ticked. Lena sat at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface, the posture of a woman maintaining stillness by deliberate decision. Patch was at the back door. 2 more men held the side windows. The remaining 2 were outside in positions they'd taken before Stokes arrived, deep enough in the tree line on the east side that they were invisible to anyone approaching from the west. Then Aldridge's cruiser came up the access road with its lights off. Webb said, "Now." Dax opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. Aldridge was 30 yards out, climbing from the cruiser with one hand on the door and the other resting near his belt in the practiced casual positioning of a man who wanted to look relaxed and wanted you to see the hand near the belt at the same time. He was in uniform. He had a document in his hand, printed, folded once. "Dax Rourke," he said. "Aldridge. I have a court order for the return of 2 minor children, Mila Cross and Avery Cross, to the custody of their legal guardian, Warren Cross." He held up the document. "I'm going to need you to step aside." "That custody order was issued on fabricated evidence," Dax said. "The evaluator doesn't exist. The credentials are forged. The presiding judge is the custodial parent's half-brother." He kept his voice level. "The motion to overturn is being filed right now in state family court." Aldridge's expression didn't change. He'd been told what to expect. Someone had briefed him. "I'm not here to discuss the merits of the order. I'm here to execute it." "Then you're going to need to wait," Dax said, "until the state court responds to the emergency motion." "I don't have to wait for anything." "You do," said a voice. Both men looked. Webb had come onto the porch. Behind him, through the doorway, 2 more men were visible, standing, not moving, not posturing, just present. Aldridge looked at the men, looked at the tree line where he knew Stokes was, did the math. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something in his face shifted. Not fear, but recalculation. The expression of a man whose plan has just encountered new variables. "What is it?" Stokes said. Not a question. He'd come out of the tree line. He was 6'2", built with the particular lean density of someone who had maintained operational fitness for 20 years as a professional requirement. He wore civilian clothes and he held nothing in his hands, which meant nothing about what was on his person. He looked at Dax the way Dax imagined a surveyor looked at a problem in the land, technically, without feeling, identifying what needed to be moved. "Motion filed," Aldridge said. "State court. It'll be dismissed." "Maybe," Aldridge said. "But if I execute this order while a state court motion is active, execute it," Stokes said. Aldridge looked at him, then looked at the porch, then looked at the document in his hand. He put the document in his pocket. "I'm not executing it," he said. Stokes looked at him for a long moment. "Aldridge." "I'm a deputy sheriff," Aldridge said. The words came out like something that had been in storage and needed the air hit. "I'm not... whatever this is." He looked at the tree line, at the two men Dax couldn't see but knew were there. "I'm not this." The silence after that was the specific silence of a situation that had just changed shape. Stokes looked at Dax. Dax looked back at him. "The children are not your concern," Stokes said. Not loud, almost conversational. The register of a man who didn't need volume to establish what he meant. "They became my concern the night I found them chained in a basement," Dax said. "You trespassed on private property and removed minors in violation of a court order." He paused. "You don't have any standing here." "Maybe not," Dax said, "but I have Gerald Cross's letter, and the fabricated Donna Hirsch assessments, and the prior cases. The two children before Mila and Avery, the ones whose medical records got altered." He paused. "And I have a state court reviewing all of it right now." Something moved in Stokes's face. The first movement he'd allowed. Not fear. Something that was fear's technical equivalent in a man who'd engineered himself past feeling it. The recognition of a miscalculation. The understanding that someone had found something that wasn't supposed to be findable. "You should walk away," Stokes said. "I've been told that before," Dax said. "Not by me." The two men from the east tree line came out of the pines behind Stokes. They'd been there the whole time, positioned, and Stokes hadn't known. He turned at the sound of movement and did the math in the same instant Dax did. 7 members of Iron Hollow MC, 1 retired rancher somewhere behind the cabin, and an ex-deputy who had just decided the line was here and not 6 inches past it, against 3 men and whatever Stokes was carrying. "You pull anything from your person," Webb said from the porch, his voice carrying the particular quality of absolute certainty. "And this gets very loud very fast, and the state court emergency motion becomes the least of your problems." Stokes stood in the pale morning light in the clearing in front of the cabin with the pines behind him and the calculation running behind his eyes, and for a long moment, nobody moved. Then Dax's phone rang. He looked at it. Unknown number, but the area code was the state capital. He answered it on the porch, while Stokes stood in the clearing and Webb stood behind Dax, and Aldridge stood by his cruiser with the court order folded in his pocket, and the 2 men from the east tree line held their positions in the pine needles and the cold morning air. The voice on the phone was a woman's, professional, precise, the voice of someone accustomed to speaking in contexts where words had immediate legal weight. "Mr. Rourke, my name is Christine Ash. I'm with the State Attorney General's office. We received documentation approximately 20 minutes ago from an attorney named Kira Malone working on behalf of Elena Cross." A pause. "We've been aware of Judge Fenwick's court for some time. The documentation you provided this morning gave us what we needed." Another pause. "I need you to tell me who is currently on that property." Dax looked at Stokes. Stokes was looking at the phone. "His name is Ray Stokes," Dax said, loud enough for it to carry. "Ex-Special Operations, private contractor. He arrived approximately 30 minutes ago with 2 associates and a Harlan County deputy who has since declined to execute the order he was carrying." He paused. "The deputy's name is Aldridge." A brief silence on the line. "Mr. Rourke, I need you to maintain the current situation. I have 2 state investigators en route to your location. ETA is approximately..." The bedroom window shattered. Not glass falling. Glass pushed, a clean, deliberate break from inside, and Dax spun toward the sound and the cabin erupted in motion, Webb through the front door, Patch coming from the back, and above the sound of feet on boards, and the cold air coming through the broken window came a child's voice, Mila's voice. Not screaming, but something worse than screaming. Deliberate, controlled. A child using the voice of someone who had learned that panic was useless, and clarity was the only tool. "There's a fourth one," she said through the broken window, her face at the gap in the frame, glass around the sill. "He came through the bathroom window. He's in the hallway." Dax was through the front door before she finished the sentence. The hallway was 6 feet long and dark. The bathroom door at the end was open and the cold was coming through it, the window above the bathtub standing wide. A man was in the hallway, large, moving fast, already past the bathroom door and reaching for the bedroom where Elena and Avery were behind a dresser against a locked door. Dax hit him from behind with everything he had. They went into the hallway wall together, the impact traveling up Dax's shoulder and through his ribs. And the man was bigger and trained, and he turned inside the hold with a speed that said exactly what he'd done for a living. And what followed was not a fight in any cinematic sense. It was 2 men in a 6-foot hallway doing damage to each other with the focused efficiency of people who understood that the one who stopped first lost. And what was behind that locked bedroom door was the only thing that mattered. Dax took a forearm to the jaw that turned his vision white at the edges. He felt his back hit the opposite wall. He got a hand on the man's collar and drove his elbow into the side of his head, and the man staggered and Dax hit him again and the man went down to one knee and Webb came through the front door and down the hallway, and it was over in the next 4 seconds. Dax stood in the hallway with his back against the wall and blood from his jaw running down his neck and his chest moving hard, and the bedroom door was still closed, still locked, still with the dresser against it. He knocked twice. Silence. Then Lena's voice. "Dax?" "It's done," he said. The dresser scraped, the lock turned, the door opened, and Lena was there. And behind her Elena with Avery, and behind Elena, Mila. Mila looked at Dax's face, at the blood, at the way he was holding his left arm slightly away from his body, where the shoulder had taken the wall. "I told you not to get hurt," she said. He looked at her. Despite everything, the jaw, the shoulder, the adrenaline still burning through him like electrical current, something moved in his chest that wasn't pain. "I know," he said. Outside, through the broken bathroom window and through the cabin walls came the sound of motorcycles. Not approaching, already there, idling, the deep collective rumble of 7 Harleys holding position in the cold morning air like something that had always been there and was simply making itself audible. And then, beneath the sound of the engines, another sound, distant, growing, the specific whine of vehicles moving fast on a road not built for speed. State investigators, 12 minutes away. Stokes was still in the clearing, and whatever calculation he'd been running behind his eyes had reached its conclusion, and Dax could see from the hallway through the open front door and across the porch that the conclusion was not the one Stokes had arrived with, and that the man standing in the pale morning light in front of 7 idling motorcycles and the open door of a cabin that had not. Ray Stokes made his decision in the space between one breath and the next. He looked at the 7 motorcycles idling in the cold morning air, looked at the 2 state vehicles coming up the access road, lights running now, the sound of them filling the pine clearing with something official and irreversible. Looked at Aldridge standing beside his cruiser with the court order still folded in his pocket, and the expression of a man who had just watched the architecture of a bad decision collapse around him in real time. Then Stokes put his hands up. Not dramatically, not with any particular feeling. He put them up the way a man put down a tool he no longer needed, with the flat practicality of someone running the calculation and finding the numbers didn't work. His 2 associates came out of the tree line with their hands up a moment later, following his lead the way they'd been trained to follow it. The state investigators were out of their vehicles before the engines stopped. 2 men and a woman, plain clothes, the particular way of moving that said federal adjacency without announcing it. The woman had a phone to her ear. She looked at Stokes with the expression of someone who recognized a name from a file and was now attaching a face to it. Dax watched from the porch. His jaw had stopped bleeding, but the shoulder was going to be a problem for a few days. He could feel the specific deep ache of something that wasn't broken, but had been introduced to a hallway wall with more enthusiasm than the joint had been prepared for. He held it slightly away from his body and watched the clearing and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. Webb came to stand beside him. Neither man spoke for a while. Then Webb said, "You need that looked at." "After," Dax said. "After what?" "After it's done." Webb looked at the clearing, at Stokes being walked to one of the state vehicles with his hands behind his back, all the operational calm still present in his posture, the manner of a man who had prepared contingencies for this outcome too. He would lawyer up within the hour. He would say nothing. But it wouldn't matter, because Christine Ashe at the State Attorney General's office had the documentation, and the documentation was the kind that didn't require a confession. Aldridge stood by his cruiser for a long moment after Stokes was secured. Then he walked to the nearest state investigator and started talking. He talked for a long time. Whatever he said it looking at the ground, which was either shame or the posture of a man doing the accounting on his own choices and finding the sum harder than expected. The bedroom window, the one Mila had broken to call out, was going to cost Garrett something to replace. Garrett was already looking at it from the side of the cabin, hands in his coat pockets, assessing it with the expression of a man mentally adding it to a list of things that needed doing. He caught Dax's eye and gave a single nod. Not about the window. The front door opened behind Dax, and Elena came out with Avery and stood on the porch in the cold morning air. She looked at the clearing, at the state vehicles, at Stokes in the back of one of them, and the breath she let out was long and uneven, and she didn't bother to make it anything else. "Is it over?" she said. "The part that looked like this," Dax said. "The rest takes longer." "The court." "Yeah, but Ashe has everything. Kira Malone will walk Elena through the rest." He paused. "Fenwick was suspended this morning pending investigation. Pell's office was secured by the state bar before we were out of bed. The emergency motion voided the custody order." He looked at her. "Warren is in a county jail in Creston Falls as of about 40 minutes ago." Elena held Avery tighter, not because she was afraid of dropping her, just because the need to hold her had nowhere else to go. "The other children," she said, "the ones from before." "The AG's office is looking. Ashe said finding them is a priority." He paused. "I don't know what they find when they look, but they're going to look." Elena nodded. She shifted Avery to her other hip and looked at the clearing again, then back at Dax. And whatever she was trying to say, she didn't have the words arranged yet, and so she didn't try to force them into shape. He understood that. He appreciated it. Mila came out of the front door and stood beside her mother and looked at the clearing with the same steadiness she brought to everything. The men being led to vehicles, the state investigators taking photographs, the motorcycles idling at the tree line like they'd been there since the beginning of time and had no particular intention of leaving. "Good," Mila said. One word. Then she went back inside. Dax looked at the space where she'd been. Webb made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. The investigators took statements for 2 hours. Dax sat on a stump at the edge of the clearing and answered questions with the economy of someone who'd been asked questions by people in official capacities before and knew the difference between what was asked and what was wanted. He told them what he'd found on CR-17. He told them about the cellar and the chain and the children. He told them about Rhonda and Vic and the documents and the photograph of Fenwick and Warren Cross. He left out the specific methodology by which certain sealed documents had been accessed, and the investigator he was talking to didn't push that particular thread, which meant either she didn't want it or she understood why he'd left it. When the investigators were done, they drove out the North Road with Stokes and his 2 associates in the back of the second vehicle. Aldridge followed in his cruiser, on his own recognizance, pending a formal interview the following morning. He didn't look at Dax when he drove past. The clearing was quiet. Garrett came around from the side of the cabin and said, "Coffee." They went inside. Lena had made a full pot and was making eggs on the wood stove with the focused competence she brought to any task, and Mila was at the table doing something with a piece of paper and a pen, and Elena was on the couch with Avery half asleep in her arms, and the cabin held all of them with the particular warmth of a space that had gone through something difficult and was now simply warm. The 7 members of the Iron Hollow MC came in one by one and found places at the table and against the walls with mugs of coffee, the leather of their cuts creaking as they settled, the smell of engine and October cold coming in with them. Nobody made speeches. Nobody said anything about what had happened in the clearing or in the hallway. They drank coffee and ate eggs, and Webb fixed a cracked chair back that had been loose before any of this started, using a screwdriver from Garrett's tool drawer. Mila looked at the men around the table for a long time. Then she slid the piece of paper across to the nearest one, a writer named Dolan, 48, who had a scar along his jaw from something he'd never explained, and said, "I made this." Dolan looked at the paper. It was a drawing, done with a ballpoint pen, of 7 motorcycles in a line. They were recognizably Harleys. She'd gotten the proportion of the tank to the wheel roughly right, the way a 6-year-old got things right when she was paying attention. Underneath the bikes she'd written, in careful block letters, "The ones who stayed." Dolan looked at it for a moment. Then he folded it with the same care he'd have used for something official and put it in the inside pocket of his cut. Nobody said anything. Dax drank his coffee. 2 weeks later, the farmhouse on CR 17 was condemned by the county, and the cellar was filled with concrete by a crew that Garrett organized without being asked. The bolt hole in the floor was buried first. It took 40 seconds to pour the concrete over it, and 3 days for it to cure. And it was done without ceremony because it didn't require any. Warren Cross was charged with child endangerment, criminal confinement, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Stuart Pell was disbarred and charged with obstruction of justice and estate fraud across 3 cases spanning 12 years. Judge Fenwick resigned before the formal suspension could be finalized, which didn't prevent the investigation from proceeding, and which everyone involved understood was not an ending but a punctuation mark. Ray Stokes was charged with criminal conspiracy and 2 counts of aggravated assault. He hired the best private attorney available, and the attorney was good, and the process was going to take time, but Christine Ashe had built her career on cases that took time, and she had the documentation. The 2 prior children, the ones from the earlier estates, were found. They were 22 and 19, living in different states, both functional in the way that people who'd survived particular kinds of damage were functional, which meant they were still standing and still moving and carrying things that were heavy in ways that didn't show. The state sent people to talk to them. It was going to take a long time. Some things took as long as they took. Elena Cross took her daughters back to Creston Falls in November, to the house on Maple Street, which she'd kept current on rent through 2 months of working double shifts and not eating much, because letting go of the house had felt like letting go of something else, and she hadn't been willing to do that. The house needed work. The neighbors brought food. Lena drove up twice in the first month without announcement to check on Avery and stayed for dinner both times, and the third time she came, she brought Garrett, and they stayed for the weekend and fixed the kitchen faucet and the back porch step and didn't make anything of it. Dax came once, in December, on a Thursday, no particular reason. He pulled the Harley into the driveway on Maple Street at around 4 in the afternoon, and Mila heard the engine from inside the house and was on the porch before he'd cut the motor. She stood at the top of the steps and watched him climb off the bike and pull off his gloves and tuck them in his jacket pocket. He looked up at her. "How's the shoulder?" she said. "Better." "How much better?" "Better enough." She came down the steps and stood on the bottom one, which put them closer to the same height, and she looked at him with the eyes that had a scale in them, the calibrated eyes, the eyes that had been doing careful math since before she should have had to do any math at all. "I drew more," she said. "Motorcycles. Can I see them?" "Maybe." He understood the maybe. The maybe was not a no. The maybe was Mila at 6 years old still holding the mechanism of trust in her own hands because she'd learned what happened when she handed it to someone else without checking the math first. And she was checking the math. And that was exactly as it should be. "I brought something," Dax said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the padlock, the one from the cellar floor, the one he'd been carrying since the night he'd found them. He held it out on his palm. Mila looked at it, at the rusted metal, the cold weight of it. "Why?" she said. "Because I thought you should be the one to decide what to do with it," he said. "It's not mine to keep." She looked at it for a long time. Her expression went through several things that she didn't try to hide. Then she reached out and took it from his palm, turned it over once, and closed her hand around it. She turned and went back up the porch steps and through the front door, and a moment later he heard the sound of metal hitting the bottom of a trash can inside the house. Not thrown. sat down, deliberately. She came back out to the porch. "Come inside," she said. "My mom made soup." He followed her up the porch steps and through the front door into a house that smelled of soup and winter warmth and children's drawings, which covered a long section of freshly painted hallway wall in crayon and marker and careful ballpoint pen. He stopped for a moment and looked at them. Animals, houses, figures that were people in the simplified geometry of a child's vision, a sun in the corner of each one, the way children always put the sun. Instinctive, constant, a habit of hope. In the kitchen, Elena looked up from the stove and said, "Sit down," without the qualifier of surprise or ceremony, the way you said it to someone you'd expected. He sat down. Avery was in a high chair at the table. She looked at Dax with the focused, uncomplicated attention of an infant who had no record of him except the bodily knowledge of being held carefully in the cold. And she made a sound that meant nothing in particular and everything in general. Mila sat across from him and put her elbows on the table and her chin in her hands and looked at him with the scale behind her eyes. "Are you going to come back?" she said. He looked at her. "After today," she said. "Are you going to come back again?" Outside, the December light was doing what December light did in this part of the country, coming in low and amber through the kitchen window, the kind of light that made ordinary things look like they'd been considered. The soup smelled like something that had been on the stove for hours. Elena's back was to him, stirring, and he could see the line of her shoulders and the particular ease that had started to come back into them over the last weeks, the gradual return of a body to itself. "Yeah," Dax said. "I'll come back." Mila looked at him with the scale, weighed it, found it, apparently, sufficient. "Okay," she said. And outside on Maple Street, a cold December wind moved through the bare trees and lifted and passed on. And inside the kitchen, the soup came to the table and the bowls went around, and the afternoon light moved across the wall the way it always moved, slow and certain, the way things moved when nothing was chasing them anymore. Later, when the soup was gone and Avery was asleep in the next room and Mila was doing something at the kitchen table with crayons, Dax stood on the front porch with his coffee and looked at the street and the bare trees and his Harley in the driveway. Elena came out and stood beside him. Not close, just adjacent. The way people stood who had been through something together without being in it together, the particular proximity of two people who'd ended up on the same side of the same thing. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "She asked me if you were going to be her friend." He looked at the Harley. "What did you tell her?" he said. "I told her I thought so," Elena said. "I told her some people come into your life because you needed them exactly when you got them, and that some of those people stay." He drank his coffee. "She said she already knew that," Elena said. He looked at the street, at the bare trees and the late afternoon light coming through them at its low December angle, the light that was almost gone but not quite, the light that was still there if you were willing to look for it. He finished his coffee. He put the mug on the porch railing. He walked down the steps to the Harley, pulled on his gloves, started the engine, and sat for a moment in the cold with the motor running under him and the exhaust smoke drifting white in the December air. The front door opened. Mila came out and stood on the porch in her coat, and she raised her hand. Not a wave exactly, just a hand up, held there. He raised his own. Then he pulled out of the driveway and went down Maple Street and turned onto the county road and opened the throttle and let the Harley find its speed, and behind him the town fell away and the road opened up into the bare winter landscape, the sky going from amber to gray to the first dark blue of early evening. He rode. The road went on the way roads went on, without opinion, without end, offering nothing except the next mile and the one after that. He'd been riding roads like this for a long time, mostly moving away from things. The particular physics of a man who used forward motion to keep from standing still long enough to feel the weight of everything he was carrying. He still carried it. The 11 years of it. The things he'd heard and not moved toward. The things he couldn't take back. But tonight the road wasn't moving him away from something. Tonight it was just a road. And somewhere behind him, 11 miles back on Maple Street, in a house that smelled of soup and crayons, a 6-year-old girl was drawing motorcycles by lamplight. 7 in a line with a single one out front, leading the way she'd seen them that morning in the pine clearing, and underneath them she was writing in careful block letters, pressing hard with the pen the way she pressed on everything she decided to keep. The Harley's engine carried across the winter fields, low and resonant, fading with distance the way all things faded. Not disappearing, just becoming part of the larger sound of the world, the hum beneath everything, the note that was still there if you were quiet enough to hear it.